Welcome to the Healing While Discovering Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Michelle. I'm an intuitive transformational coach, certified life coach, certified NLP practitioner, and speaker. I've spent the last 22 plus years helping myself and my clients learn how to create their own happiness and live more abundant lives. In this time, I've also overcome and healed from child sexual molestation, a compulsive eating disorder, hunger, and homelessness. Now it's your turn to move forward with your life and heal from childhood traumas or past experiences. In this podcast, I'll share how I was able to overcome all of my past struggles, as well as my personal stories of overcoming jealousy, loneliness, resentment, and bitterness, and how I learned to forgive. I'll also help you explore your shadow self, deal with having low or no self-esteem, and address feelings of not being worthy or loved. Using my personal experiences and extensive training, as well as stories of grief, loss, depression, and anxiety from my guests, I'll help you change your life and finally heal. Hey, loves. Welcome back to another episode of the Healing While Discovering Yourself podcast. And if you are new around these parts, welcome. I am so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you decided to hit play. I'm so glad that you decided to download, because today is another, I believe, powerful episode. And today we're going to be talking about the ego. And this episode is all about the ego not being your enemy, right? Today, I know we look at ego and we think that we look at it as if it is a bad thing. And the truth is that your ego is not a bad thing, but your ego is actually that part of you that allows you, that helps you to show up confident and self-assured and reassured and empowered in the things that you are doing. And I know for me, one of the ways that I realized that my ego was not a bad thing, because for a number of years, including recently, maybe about a year, 2 years ago, I did look at the ego as if it was a bad thing, or that I looked at my ego as if it were my enemy. But then the deeper I traveled on my healing and self-discovery journey, and for those of you who don't know, I am in school working on my PhD in developmental psychology. So the more information that I learned and that I gained, I realized, like, wait a minute, this the ego is not the enemy here. And every time I look at the ego as if it is my enemy, then I make worse decisions, right? My decisions aren't as solid as they would be if I didn't hold that belief or that story. You know, one of the things that I used to do, or I should say my favorite words when I were younger and when I was insecure, when I was so full of pride and I lacked confidence, my favorite phrase was, I know. Right? Like somebody would say something to me like, oh, Andrea, did you know that, the moon is 5 million miles away from the earth? I'd be like, yeah, I know. And guess what? I wouldn't know. Listen, I'm not saying that the moon is 5 million miles away from the earth. I actually don't even know how far away the moon is from the earth. Okay. So don't all of y'all astrologers, what is astrology? Your astrologers, like, don't check me. I don't know how far the moon is from the earth. I'm just putting that number out there. Okay. Now that that's clear. But I would say things like, I know, even when I didn't know, because I thought that I had to prove myself to people. I thought that I always had to appear as smart and as intelligent. And I know now, looking back, that was a trauma response, that I was in survival mode because of all the trauma that I had experienced. I felt like I had something to prove. And so when people would bring information to me, especially new information, I'd be like, oh yeah, I know. And then when they would ask me more questions about it, I didn't have anything to say, right? So thank God for growth and maturity and evolution, because I hardly ever use the words I know especially when someone is giving me new information. Now, when someone is giving me new information, whether they think that I should know it or not, I'm always like, oh, wow, like I didn't know, or I had no clue. Or I'd say something like, I'm sure I probably learned that at one point, but clearly it wasn't important because I forgot, right? I don't have to say I know when I don't know, because when I say I know, when I don't know, I actually make myself look more like a fool. And so do you, just so we're clear, so do you when you really don't know, right? And so again, as I traveled on my self-discovery journey, I realized that, wait a minute, my ego is actually not my friend. And if I'm putting on these airs and I'm pretending like I know something that I don't, is that really my ego, right? Am I being egocentric and egotistical? Am I really being that if I'm pretending like I don't know something? And I realized that I wasn't. And so I just want to talk to you about the ego and just break a few things down for you, just so that you're clear and you have a frame of reference for why I'm saying that the ego is not your enemy. So let's start out with the basics. What is the ego? What is ego? In the simplest form, your ego, or the ego, is a person's sense of self-esteem or self-importance. That is all that it is. It is a person's sense of self-esteem, right? How they feel about themselves or self-importance. And before you say, oh, that's arrogant or whatever, no, it is not. If a person does not have high self-esteem, if they don't feel good about themselves and view themselves as important, guess what? No one else will. So the fact that someone looks at themselves as important, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. We want people to have a good sense of their self. And then also, ego is just a function of our personality, right? Part of what makes us who we are is our ego. And so before I get into, like healthy signs of a healthy and unhealthy ego and how how our ego serves us, I just want to give y'all, thanks to my PhD. I just want to give you guys you folks, you people, because you're not all guys listening to this, a traditional view of ego and then a more modern view of the ego. So from a traditional view of the ego, it actually started with Sigmund Freud. And I don't even think you have to be into psychology to know who Sigmund Freud is, because he looked at everything in terms of either having a sexual drive or an aggressive drive. And, he looked at development as it was all sexual. It had to do with, anal and opiate, the electric complex and, all of these things, right? So most people know who Sigmund Freud is, but he is the father, the founder of psychoanalytical theory, right? He is the one who thought of it. He was a doctor, and then he got into neuroscience and then started looking at psychoses and all of these things, right? So that's who Freud is. And actually, Freud is the one who, which I didn't know this before I started studying psychology, he is the one who actually I don't want to say identify, but I guess for lack of a better word, now identified the conscious and the unconscious mind. Before Freud started talking about it, society didn't necessarily look at our thoughts as being, conscious thought or unconscious thought. We just thought that, everything that we see is all that is there. And so Freud is actually the one who talked about, the unconscious, and he talked about our consciousness like it was the iceberg, like the top of the iceberg was consciousness. And everything under that was the unconscious or the subconscious mind. And so he's the father of that, right? But he said that the personality functioned in three parts, right? The id, the ego, and the superego. And now the id part or function of the personality is pleasure seeking, right? It lives off the pleasure principle. Whatever I want, I get. It's very hedonistic. It's all about pleasuring themselves, getting everything that it desires. That's the id, that pleasure-seeking part of our personality. And then there is the superego, which is that self-righteous part of our personality, that moralistic part, the part that is, these are the rules that are black and white. And then there is the ego. And the ego serves as a mediator between the id, which is pleasure seeking, and the superego, which is self-righteous and moralistic and only thinks in terms of black and white. And the ego is in the middle, balancing out the desires of the two, the desire to have everything that we want, and then the desire to only do things according to black and white. And if it doesn't, if 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, then we can't do it. And if it's not black, then it's white. The ego serves as that balance. And so if we are saying that the ego serves as that balance, right, which is that reality principle, which says, okay, before I just go and steal this Snickers from the store, this is a very simplistic explanation, right? So just go with me. Before I go and steal the Snickers from the store, right, the super ego is like, that is wrong and don't do it. The ego is saying, okay, how is it that I can satisfy the superego and still be in integrity, if you will, and then also satisfy my desire to get a Snicker, right? Oh, wait a minute. I don't have any cash. Well, I have a card. Let me use my card and let me pay for it, right? And so the ego serves as this balance. And so when you think about that from a traditional perspective, there is nothing about the ego that is bad. However, our modern view of ego, we do look at ego as if it's a bad thing. And we look at ego as someone who is someone who has a big ego, as someone who is self-righteous and self-centered and arrogant and narrow-minded and full of pride and all of those things. And especially in the spiritual circles and in the healing circles, we say, oh, don't do that. It's your ego talking to you, right? Spiritual leaders make ego out to be a bad thing when ego is not a bad thing. And then society, we look at someone who is, arrogant, and we say, oh my gosh, they're egotistical. And that's actually not true. Someone who actually operates that way is someone who has a small ego, right? And so there are some signs, in case y'all are sitting here listening like, Andrea, how do I know if I have a healthy or an unhealthy ego? Well, if you would wait a second, I will tell you, have some patience, please. Grab a pen and paper, because I'm going to give you some signs of a healthy ego and signs of an unhealthy ego. So if you're sitting here and you're wondering, how do I know where my ego is, right? In terms of health, is my ego healthy or unhealthy? So here are some signs of a healthy ego. A healthy ego is flexible, right? As opposed to being rigid. A healthy ego is flexible. A person with a healthy ego is confident. They're also humble. Okay. You can be confident and you can be humble. Those things are not mutually exclusive. You're self-reliant. A person with a healthy ego is self-reliant. They're discerning. They're focused. And instead of them looking at things that happen in their lives as obstacles, they look at the things that happen in their lives, like the lessons when things don't go as planned. They look at them as opportunities to be explored. This launch or this thing didn't work out. What can I do differently in the future, perhaps, to make it work out? Instead of saying it didn't work out, I'm a failure, right? A person who has a healthy ego will look at it as opportunities to be explored. They're dedicated. They are resourceful, and they don't need to be right all the time, right? And they have no need to prove themselves. Those are some of the signs. Of course, this list is not all inclusive, right? It's not comprehensive, but these are some of the signs that you can use to recognize whether or not you have a healthy ego. Now, an unhealthy ego. A person with an unhealthy ego is going to be avoidant, and they're going to engage in escapism, which is, substance abuse, distractions, get wrapped up in reality, TV, fantasy, football, not fantasy football. No. Just kidding. But they get wrapped up in like the fantasy life, right? Anything that takes them away from their current reality, anything that's going to help them avoid what's actually in front of them. So again, they're avoidant, they're arrogant, they're self-centered. And listen, these things that I'm describing on the surface and considering the modern view of the ego, it sounds like somebody who is egocentrical, right? Egocentric. I think I said the wrong word, but whatever. Y'all know what I mean. Egocentric, right? A person with an unhealthy ego is condescending. They're opinionated. It's like everyone has an opinion. Yours doesn't have to be right, right? Or even if it's right to you, it doesn't mean it's right to everyone else, right? They're also aggressive. They're defensive. And on the opposite of looking at opportunities to be explored, a person with an unhealthy ego looks at things as obstacles. Like, oh, this thing happened. Like, oh, how am I going to get over this? How am I going to overcome this? A person with an unhealthy ego also wants to be right at all cost. Okay. If you have an unhealthy ego, you are insecure, and you want to be right at all costs. And a person with an unhealthy ego is also pretentious and self-righteous. Now, I know that the signs that I just gave you, I know you're probably thinking, probably before this episode, like, oh my gosh, in my mind, it was flipped, right? A person with a healthy ego would be, or a person with a healthy ego would be, need to be right and all of these things, or with a big ego, I should say, right? Because we don't necessarily talk about ego in terms of healthy and unhealthy. We just talk about it in big and small ego. So what I just described, you would think that a person with a small ego would be, all of the things I said for people with the humble, right? Oh, that's someone with a small ego, right? Opportunities, and you don't have to prove themselves to be right, and all of that. That's someone with a small ego. And someone with the big ego is someone who is, arrogant and self-centered and condescending, when that is simply not true. And the reason why we know that is not true is because the ego is not our enemy. Our ego is here to serve us, to protect us, to help us really, truly live in our own reality. Because remember, it serves as the mediator between the id, which is pleasure seeking, and the superego, which is self-righteous and moralistic. And it helps to mediate the balance between the two so that we can live in harmony. And that's what life is all about. It's not so much about balance, but it's about harmony, right? Taking these things and coexisting and existing together. So what are some of the things that you can do to strengthen your ego? Again, this list is not, comprehensive and all-inclusive. These are just some of the things that I have used in my life and also have helped my clients. And then if you follow the people who we deem as, wealthy and successful, these are some of the things that they have engaged in also to help them to strengthen their ego. So one of the things that you can do is affirmations, and affirmations are extremely powerful. And for those of you who are saying, well, affirmations never work for me, I will say this. In order for affirmations to be effective, and trust me, I know I have a 52 card Limitless Possibilities affirmation deck, so I am big on affirmations. The thing to make affirmations work is you actually have to allow yourself to feel, the actual affirmation. So if you have an affirmation and every time you say that affirmation, if it doesn't feel like it's true for you, then you need to get another affirmation, because the affirmation, it has to be true for you, right? Like if you know that you're not a millionaire, nowhere close to be a millionaire, then don't affirm I am a millionaire, right? Because everything in you is like, no, you're not. Right. And so in order to make that affirmation feel more authentic for you, you can say, I'm in the process of becoming a millionaire, right? I'm in the process of becoming a millionaire. And that is true if you are actually in the process of becoming a millionaire. You have a strategy and you have a plan and you're actually executing on that, right? So in order for affirmations to be effective, number one, they have to be true for you, not true for other people, but true for you. And you have to allow yourself to actually feel the emotions that come up with that affirmation. Another way to strengthen your ego is journaling. And I got to be honest with y'all, for a very long time, I actually stayed away from journaling. I was like, nope, it doesn't work for me. And I was even talking to my therapist because when I got accepted into my PhD program, I actually went on the search for a therapist, hired a therapist, and we've been working together for months. And so in one of my sessions with my therapist, she was like, oh, Andrea, one of the things that you can do is journal, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, no, I do not like journaling. That therapy will not work for me. And I'm sitting there and I was like, oh, wait, wait a second. I just realized I actually journal every day, right? I actually, every morning when I practice my MORE method, I actually journal. So after I do my mindfulness meditation, I sit and I write in my journal, but I didn't look at that as journaling. I just looked at that as, oh, let me clear, the space, the things that came up for me during my mindfulness meditation session. Let me just write that down. But that actually is journaling. And it actually gives me an additional perspective, right? And then I can see it, what I've experienced in black and white. And it just confirms and affirms what I had experienced in my meditation. So another way to strengthen your ego is positive self-talk. Now, that's different from affirmations. I know people look at, well, affirmation and positive self-talk, they're the same thing. No, affirmations are stating things like in the present moment, like this is, who you are in the present moment. And it's for a future desire, right? Positive self-talk is saying things like, I can get through this day, right? Like, I can do this, or I can make this sale. I can, buy this car. I can buy this home. And positive self-talk does include affirmations because you can say, I am a strong person. I am a positive person, right? Those are affirmations, but positive self-talk and affirmations are not the same thing, right? Positive self-talk is if you're giving a speech like, yes, you can give this speech, Andrea, right? So there are two different things, but it also works to help strengthen your ego. And lastly, having a mindfulness meditation practice is, I would have to say, for me personally, of all of the 4 modalities that I've listed on how to strengthen your ego, the one that has been the most impactful has been having a solid mindfulness meditation practice. And it's left such an impression on me that I decided to become a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. And I actually have a 10-week mindfulness meditation mentorship that I teach live. We're together 10 weeks. We have workbooks and we actually practice meditation during the live. You get exercises and additional meditations to do on your own. But having a mindfulness meditation practice is so powerful because when you combine mindfulness, which is awareness and being in the present moment, and meditation, which is focus or having a focus or focal point, when you combine those two things together, it makes for such an amazing experience. And it has been, and this is just my experience, right? I'm not saying this for everyone else, but having a mindfulness meditation practice, I have seen exponential growth. With just the affirmations and the journaling and the positive self-talk, there was growth. Don't get me wrong, and you will experience growth. But it's not until you add this mindfulness meditation practice where you are intentionally going within yourself and examining the parts of yourself that you begin to actually hear the voice of your ego and then silence the voice of all the others. And that's when you learn, like, oh, wait a minute. My ego is actually giving me some really good, solid information, right? So if you forget everything that I've said in this episode, the one thing that I want you to walk away from and remember is that your ego is not your enemy. Your ego is your friend, and it is your responsibility to actually strengthen your own ego. And you can use affirmations, journaling, positive self-talk, and mindfulness meditation to strengthen your ego so that you can silence all of the other voices and use your ego to your own advantage. All right. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. If this is your first episode, then I am going to invite you to listen to some of the other episodes, at least listen to like the first 2 or 3 episodes, because then that'll give you an idea of the thing, of my style, who I am, and all of those things. But as I go, just know that the love in me salutes the love in you.
Hey loves, are you looking for a safe place to hang out while you're healing with other like-minded individuals? If so, then I would love for you to join my private Facebook community called Healing While Discovering Yourself, named after the podcast. This community is for those who are truly seeking a safe place to heal and also show up authentically. If this interests you, then I'm going to invite you to go to Facebook/groups/healing while discovering. I look forward to seeing you in the group. What would you do if you knew that in 5 minutes you could take back control of your life, calm your nerves, and shift into your power? You would take advantage of that offer, wouldn't you? Well, I would love to share with you my proprietary The More method. It's a method that I use every day to help me take back control of my life and master my inner world. See, I don't know if anyone has ever told you, but you are not just a physical being. You are not just a spiritual being, you are a multi-dimensional being. And that means that you are spiritual, you are mental, you are emotional, and you are physical. The More method is designed to help you truly take back control of your life and master your inner world, every area of your inner world, so that you can show up authentically and unapologetically. Go to themoremethod.co. Again, that's themoremethod.co to download the video and amazing guide to show you how to take back control of your life and master your inner world in as little as 5 minutes a day.